The United States and Canada, two of the friendliest neighbors on Earth. Or are they? Right now, tensions are rising. New tariffs, retaliatory threats, and sharp words exchanged across the border have put a strain on one of the world's most stable alliances. Disagreements over trade are turning into diplomatic headaches, and both countries are feeling the pressure. But here's the thing. This isn't new. The US-Canada relationship has always had its share of friction. Disputes over borders, battles over resources, and clashes over national identity. They've gone from war enemies to war allies, economic partners to trade rivals, often all within the same century. So how did two countries with so much in common come to blows again, and what does this latest dispute reveal about their long and complicated history? Stick with us until the end as we trace the roots of the US-Canada relationship, from revolutionary invasions to NAFTA negotiations, and from battlefield smoke to boardroom standoffs. Because understanding this story isn't just about history, it's about where we're heading next. Before Canada and the United States became neighbors in peace, they were enemies in war. In the 18th century, long before there was a Canada as we know it, the land was a battleground between French and British colonial forces. And when the American colonies declared independence in 1776, they didn't stop at breaking free. They looked north. During the Revolutionary War, the Continental Army launched an invasion of Quebec in 1775, hoping French Canadians would join the cause. They didn't. The Americans failed to capture Quebec City, and the northern push was repelled. Still, the attempt planted seeds of distrust. When the United States finally achieved independence in 1783, many loyalists, colonists still loyal to Britain, fled north to British Canada, especially to what is now Ontario. This migration would shape Canadian culture and politics for generations, reinforcing the idea that Canada would not follow the American example of revolution. By the early 19th century, tensions were rising again. The War of 1812, often overshadowed in American memory, was a defining moment in US-Canada relations. The United States declared war on Britain over maritime rights and impressment of sailors, but also, again, set its sights on Canadian territory. President Madison and many in Congress believed Canadians would welcome American liberation. Once again, they were wrong. American forces invaded Upper Canada, what is now modern-day Ontario, several times, but were repeatedly pushed back by a mix of British troops, Canadian militias, and Indigenous allies, most famously under the leadership of Tecumseh, a Shawnee chief and key figure in the resistance. The war ended in a stalemate with the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, but for Canadians, it was a defining victory. They had stood up to the Americans and held their ground. The war planted the seeds of Canadian nationalism and a cautious wariness of their southern neighbor. And here's a fun fact. The White House was burned down by British troops in retaliation for the American burning of York, now Toronto. Yes, Canada and the US once traded fire and flames. After the War of 1812, both nations cooled their ambitions, but tensions didn't disappear. The US expansion westward caused anxiety in British North America, especially as Americans began talking about manifest destiny, the belief that they were destined to spread across the continent. Meanwhile, border disputes flared up, especially in the Pacific Northwest and around Maine. In 1846, the Oregon Treaty settled the US-Canada border west of the Rockies, setting it at the 49th parallel. It was a peaceful resolution, but a reminder that both countries still had competing visions for North America. Then came the American Civil War. Canada didn't fight, but it was deeply affected. British Canada remained officially neutral, but allowed Confederate agents to operate within its borders, which infuriated the Union. The US even considered retaliatory invasions, but the war ended before anything escalated. The aftermath of the Civil War, however, helped accelerate Canadian unification. In 1867, the British colonies in North America formed the Dominion of Canada, in part as a defense against potential American aggression. And just to be safe, the US created War Plan Red, an actual military strategy for invading Canada, which remained active until the 1930s. The 20th century marked a dramatic shift in US-Canada relations, from guarded neighbors to essential allies. World War I was a turning point. While the US didn't enter until 1917, Canada, while still part of the British Empire, fought from the beginning. Canadian forces distinguished themselves in battles like Vimy Ridge and earned international respect. For the first time, Americans began to view Canadians as equals in battle. Then came the Great Depression, which strained both economies and tested political relationships. But it was World War II that truly solidified the US-Canada alliance. Canada declared war on Germany before the United States did. But when the US entered the war, the two countries coordinated military and economic efforts more closely than ever before. They built joint defense systems, including the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, which still exists today. The Cold War only deepened this cooperation. Facing the Soviet threat, Canada and the US partnered in NORAD to defend against potential nuclear attacks from the North. They also became founding members of NATO, pledging to defend each other in the face of aggression. Behind the scenes, Canadian intelligence worked closely with the CIA. And yes, there were secret bunkers built under the Canadian shield to house government officials in case of nuclear war. Yet not everything was smooth sailing. Even among friends, disagreements happen, and the US and Canada had plenty. In 1965, the Canadian flag debate raged, and many Canadians saw adopting a new, uniquely Canadian flag, the maple leaf, as a way to distance their identity from both Britain and the overpowering influence of the US. During the Vietnam War, Canada offered asylum to American draft dodgers, angering many in the US. Over 30,000 Americans crossed the border to avoid conscription, a move that symbolized Canada's independent foreign policy. In the 1980s and 1990s, environmental disputes flared up. Acid rain, overfishing, and pollution of shared waterways became hot-button issues. Then came trade. The signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 marked a new economic era. Canada, the US, and Mexico created one of the largest free trade zones in the world. The economic integration was deep, considering over 75% of Canadian exports go to the US, and the two countries share the largest undefended border in the world. Still, tensions flared during the Trump administration, with tariffs imposed on Canadian steel and aluminum. Diplomatic relations were tested, but not broken. For all their cooperation, Canadians and Americans often define themselves in contrast to one another. Canadians see themselves as more modest, more polite, more social democratic. Healthcare, gun control, and multiculturalism are points of national pride. Americans often view Canada as their quieter, gentler sibling, an image both cherished and rejected by Canadians. The two nations share movies, music, sports, and celebrities, but also maintain distinct cultural identities. And every once in a while, a Canadian reminds Americans that basketball was invented by a Canadian. Today, the US-Canada relationship is among the strongest bilateral partnerships in the world. The two nations collaborate on everything from border security to cybersecurity, space exploration to pandemic response. They hold annual leadership summits. They coordinate on Arctic policy. They even share NORAD Santa tracker every Christmas Eve. Yet, they still disagree on key issues, from pipelines to climate change to foreign policy. Canada took a different path on Cuba, Iraq, and international peacekeeping. But here's the truth. The ability to disagree without destroying the relationship is part of what makes the US-Canada alliance so enduring. It's built on shared values such as democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, but also on mutual respect. And while Americans often focus more on their southern border, The relationship with Canada is far more stable, profitable, and quietly essential. So what does the relationship between the US and Canada really mean? It means two nations that were once enemies have become partners, but not without challenges. It means a shared border where trade, culture, and ideas flow freely until they don't. And it means learning to manage differences, like the most recent disputes over tariffs on key exports, which have once again tested diplomatic patience on both sides of the border. While Canada and the US remain close allies, these economic flare-ups are reminders that even the strongest friendships require ongoing negotiation, respect, and transparency. The story of these two nations isn't one of blind loyalty, it's one of real-world diplomacy between equals. If this look into US-Canada relations gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more world history.